The movements of the living body are so smooth and delicate that man has turned them into an art form. Even though our bones are fixed rigidly beneath the skin, we can coordinate their activities to produce fluid movements like this. And every move we make with one part of the body affects the others. An arm moved like this means that other parts of the body have to move just to keep our balance. We can touch, grasp, kick, or push anything within reach with speed and accuracy, and never give it a second thought. Even such an everyday activity as walking takes us years to learn. But once we've learned how, walking and running become second nature, along with a whole repertoire of other human movements.
The human body is really a collection of movable segments. It's evolved this way to help us make the most of our opportunities. The parts of the body that move most freely are the ones that help us to explore the world and to influence it. The head turns to give us a wider view. The spine rotates to help us move in new directions. The points at which the bones meet must be well lubricated and durable. That's the job of the joints, over 200 of them in the human body. Hundreds of times a day, as here in the hip joint, the hip bone rubs against the pelvis in the depths of the body as we walk or sit or kick. Sometimes the joint is more than a simple ball and socket. In the elbow, for example, 3 bones meet, and the design of the joint has to be more complex. Our joints have to last for a lifetime. They'll carry this child through a long and active life, when she's learnt how to control her muscles. But at the other end of life, it's often joints that let us down. He learnt to walk 60 years ago. Now his joints are much less efficient. We all need good working parts and the ability to control them if we're to lead an active life. When we're reasonably fit, we never give a second thought to the remarkable independence of human movement. When we choose to move, to get up or to walk, the whole complex process just happens.
1, 2, 3, 4.
To produce even a simple movement means using many different muscles. If we're not very fit, there's nothing like physical jerks for showing up muscles we never knew we had. Moving one part of the body, the top half say, would overbalance us, unless all sorts of adjustments were being made to the rest of the body. A joint like the shoulder gives us a lot of freedom. It's the nearest joint to a wheel in the human body, and as man evolved, it provided a lot of freedom for his arms. A joint like the elbow has much less freedom. It can only move in one plane. Our joints can support heavy weights, but allow delicate movements. They can move in 3 dimensions or restrict us to 2. Each one has a unique interior design. With a joint like the elbow, the bones fit snugly together when the arm is fully stretched. The top end of the forearm bone has a hook-like end. As the arm straightens out, the end of the bone comes up against the bone in the upper arm, and the arm can bend no further. The shoulder is the meeting point of several different bones, but they don't interlock very closely. So we can move the arm up and down, or we can rotate it. Some human bodies have to take quite a beating. This water skier, for example, could experience as much as 11 times the force of gravity during his sudden takeoff. What are the elements that combine to produce such a supreme example of human skill and movement? How can a human body travel on water at up to 100 kilometers an hour, anticipating and adjusting to the random variations of wind, waves, and the pull of the rope? To support these strains, many of the most stressed joints have a natural form of hydraulic suspension. The knee is one of them. Here it's taking quite a bashing from the high-speed jolts. If we look at its structure, we can see how it copes with this treatment. The ends of the bones have small shock absorbers of cartilage, and the joint is surrounded by sheets of collagen, a tough, inelastic fibre. This forms a watertight capsule which is full of lubricating fluid. When the leg bends, the two bones are usually kept apart by the pressure in the fluid. If they do get pushed together, the cartilage pads protect the bone ends. Here, filmed inside a living human, is the interior of a knee joint. This seaweed-like tissue contains cells that secrete the human lubricating fluid. Better than any manufactured lubricating oil, this fluid never has to be drained and replaced. At the top of the screen is one of the cartilage pads that act as shock absorbers when the heaviest jolts push the bones close to each other. To tie the whole joint together, there are long ligaments of tough tissue connected to the bones above and below the knee. When he crashes down on the water, his knees might have to take up to 20 times the force of gravity. For a moment, it's as if he weighs a ton or more. Not all joints have natural hydraulic suspension like the knee. The spine, for example, doesn't move nearly as much as the knee. It's made up of lots of little bones, the vertebrae. They have shock absorbers between each bone, made up of simple discs of cartilage. With every bump, each pair of vertebrae is squeezed together, and with 25 discs down the length of the spine, that adds up to a lot of shock-absorbing power. For 70 years or so, the lubrication and suspension of our joints do a pretty good job. But like the rest of the body, the joints sometimes show signs of age and lead to a slowing down of the body's moving parts. Occasionally, the connective tissue around the joint is attacked by disease. This is arthritis, inflammation of the joints. The ends of the bones become rough and the surrounding tissues swell up. The lubricating fluid sometimes dries up at the same time. Then every movement around the affected joint becomes difficult and painful. Arthritis can affect most of the joints, but fortunately it's not inevitable. While some of us may eventually be affected, plenty more of us will be able to use our joints actively into a ripe old age.
Fortunately, at this age, we don't usually have any problems with our joints. It's difficult enough learning to control our muscles. For a lifetime of smooth movement, it's important that the child learns how to make its nerves, muscles, and brain work together. But there are some skills we don't seem to need to learn at all. We can perform them from birth. Look at these strange events, for example. A mother can often produce this mimicking response in her baby. It shows there must already be some link between seeing his mother's face do something and moving his own tongue and lips to do the same thing. In a similar way, if you put a very young baby on a surface like this, he'll perform walking actions with his legs at a stage when he's still a long way from being able to walk unaided. There's probably some sort of internal wiring that produces these actions without learning. There seem to be automatic patterns of movement that we're all born with. This grasping reflex is another way our nerves and muscles link up some of these inborn movements. The growing nervous system starts to make connections in the brain and spinal cord. Nerve circuits connect different groups of muscles so that complicated movements become possible. As the growing child explores his world, he's devising new patterns of movement. A child will often repeat an action over and over just for fun, but he's preparing his muscles and joints for the more serious business of surviving in the adult world. He's learning how to produce a range of movements for all occasions. To move like this, the child's brain is sending instructions to his muscles, but he's also getting information back. He can tell whether his foot has hit the ground and whether the ground is hard or soft. This sort of information plays a very important part in all our movements. It's called feedback. The messages from our limbs that tell us how well we're doing, and that tell us how to make the fine adjustments that keep us on course. The skier is able to pull on the bar with just the right amount of strength to keep his balance, but the tension in the rope changes all the time. To stay on course, he senses the pull on the rope and changes his own muscle force to balance it. And he has to do all this almost instantaneously. At the same time, he responds to feedback from his feet, feeling the push of the waves and relaxing his muscles to ride above them. A typical voluntary muscle, like the biceps, for example, has receptors to feed back useful information as the limb moves and the muscle contracts. Some receptors tell how long a muscle is at any time. Others tell how taut it is. And others feed back information about the speed at which the muscle changes length. But there are some very fast movements where the feedback from the muscles would take too long to travel back to the brain in time to make adjustments before the next movement. A skilled musician can make several accurate movements in the time it would take feedback from one of them to reach his brain. These movements are accurate because he's learnt them as a linked chain. He's built them into his nervous system as one pattern of movements instead of a series of separate ones. To learn any physical skill, we have to assemble the individual muscle movements, element by element, using feedback to shape and polish the movements. It's a slow business at first and involves a lot of trial and error. With perseverance, we usually reach the stage of being able to perform perfectly every time. Even if things go wrong, our learned reactions contribute to a safe landing at high speed. With feedback from muscles and joints, we get a picture of the position, speed, and acceleration of the various parts of the body. But we need one other essential piece of information: a sense of balance. The body needs to have some way of knowing up from down. It also needs to know about the angle of the head and its direction of movement. This job is done by the vestibular apparatus tucked away in the inner ear. It's a complicated set of hoops and chambers with several different organs that can detect subtle changes in balance and movement. This hollow organ is no bigger than a thumbnail. The snail-like structure deals with hearing, but the rest of the organ is hollow bone containing fluid-filled chambers. Some of the chambers contain a substance like gelatine with heavy crystals embedded in it. It responds readily to gravity, and any tilt of the head will move it to one side or the other. In the walls of the chamber are sensitive cells like hairs, which send nerve messages to the brain whenever they're bent. Any tilt of the head will send the crystals and the jelly rolling over the hair cells to tell us that the head is no longer horizontal. In a situation like this, any tiny deviation from the horizontal will lead to all sorts of muscle adjustments in the body to keep the head level. While part of the inner ear tells the brain about the angle of the head, there's another organ that senses rotation. These three bony hoops in each ear can detect acceleration in all three planes. That's why they're roughly at right angles to each other. Each hoop is filled with a watery liquid and has a flap of tissue, rather like a trapdoor. When the head starts to rotate, the trapdoor opens and sends nerve signals to the brain, but the liquid stays where it is. When the head stops rotating, the fluid keeps moving and pushes the trapdoor in the opposite direction. So this system really detects changes in rotation. The trapdoor only sends messages when we stop or start rotating. When the skier is rotating steadily, his head and the fluid inside it keep pace, and so there are no more signals. But when he stops, he feels as if he's still going round. This giddy feeling is due to the inertia of the liquid, which continues rotating past the trapdoor for 20 or 30 seconds. These signals from the inner ear also produce motion sickness, as the moving fluid stimulates the nerve cells.
The more you look at what's involved in human movement, the more surprising it is that we can move at all without constantly falling over. So many computations are needed to deal with the torrents of information from muscles, joints and organs of balance that there's a separate section of the brain entirely devoted to the task. This is the cerebellum, whose name means little brain. It's an outcrop on the brainstem, just where the neck meets the head. The cerebellum takes over the boring administrative details of organising our movements once we've made the decision to carry out some action or other. By perching underneath the main part of the brain and above the rest of the body, it can monitor the nervous activity that's going up and down between the brain and the muscles. It needs to make so many computations every second that it contains many times more nerve cells than the much larger volume of the main brain. In its cells, it stores copies of all the skills we learn as we grow up. Without the work of the cerebellum, smooth and coordinated movement would be impossible. This man chooses to dance with his conscious brain, but his cerebellum contains the detailed patterns of movement he's previously learnt. When he makes his decision, it goes to the cerebellum where it meets feedback coming up the spine from various parts of the body, telling him the positions and speed of his arms and legs, for example. So the cerebellum receives the general instruction to dance and works out how to move the various parts of the body from their current positions to achieve the movements the dancer wants. The cerebellum can pull whole programs of learnt movements off the shelf and tinker with them here and there before sending instructions back down the spine to the muscles. It's because of the cerebellum that we can make familiar movements in entirely new situations. The texture of the ground and the rhythm of the music may be entirely new to him, but his cerebellum will make the necessary adjustments. We all have thousands of programs stored away in the cerebellum for every useful human movement, and a few less useful ones. The body has evolved to give us stored patterns of movement that we can vary as we wish. Every time we move, we call upon the services of many different parts of the body. Muscles, joints, nerves and brain all combine to make sure that we can cope with any situation, however unexpected.